You know, there's a specific texture to silence. Most people think silence is just the absence of noise, a void where sound used to be, but they're wrong. Silence is weight. It has temperature. There is the warm, companionable silence of a lover sleeping next to you. There's a cold, sharp silence of a winter morning before the birds wake up. And then there's the silence I lived in for 4 years. It was a heavy, suffocating silence. It was the sound of people holding their breath when I entered a room, waiting for me to leave so they could exhale their judgment. It was the sound of being the person nobody wanted to talk to, the ghost in the corner, the stain on the family portrait. My name is Elias, and for 1,460 days, I was a phantom in my own house. To understand the revenge, you have to understand the prison. The house is called Blackwood Manor. Even the name sounds like something out of a Gothic novel, doesn't it? It sits like a brooding sentinel on 3 acres of manicured lawn, just outside the city limits. It's a Victorian beast, all dark brick and slate roof, with turret windows that look like unblinking eyes and a wraparound porch that wraps the house in a wooden embrace. It's the kind of house that demands respect, the kind of house that whispers old money to anyone driving past. My parents, Richard and Sylvia, have lived there for 25 years. They didn't just live there, they performed there. They walked the hallways like deposed royalty, waiting for their kingdom to be restored. Richard, a man whose ego was inversely proportional to his actual business acumen, treated the master study like a throne room. Sylvia, a woman who treated social standing like a blood sport, viewed the garden as her personal fiefdom. Then there was the rest of the court. My brother, Julian. At 32, Julian was still finding himself, a process that apparently required living rent-free in the entire east wing of the manor and drinking single malt scotch that he didn't pay for. He called himself a musician, though the only thing he played regularly was a victim. And my sister, Mara, 2 years ago, she and her husband Greg downsized. In their language, downsizing meant moving into the fully renovated carriage house at the back of the property. Greg was a corporate consultant who never seemed to consult, a man who wore 3-piece suits to eat breakfast, but hadn't brought home a paycheck since the Obama administration. And then there was me. I didn't live in the East Wing. I didn't live in the carriage house. I lived in the converted attic space above the detached garage. It was a space designed for storage, not human habitation. In the winter, the frost would form patterns on the inside of the single-pane windows. In the summer, the heat would pool up there, thick and oppressive, smelling of baked dust and gasoline fumes from the cars below. To them, my location on the property was a metaphor. I was above the garage because I was a help. I was a failure. I didn't go to law school like Richard demanded. I didn't marry a debutante with a trust fund like Sylvia dreamed. I work with my hands. I restore vintage motorcycles and classic cars. I come home with grease permanently etched into the whorls of my fingerprints and the smell of engine oil clinging to my flannel shirts. To my family, I was a disappointment, a blue-collar stain on their white-collar fantasy. But here's the thing they didn't know. Here is the ember I kept burning in the center of my chest, the secret that kept me warm during those freezing nights in the attic. Richard and Sylvia didn't own Blackwood Manor. Uncle Arthur did. Arthur was Richard's older brother, the tragedy of the family, the black sheep. He was an eccentric genius who made a quiet fortune in industrial patents and then retreated from the world. He despised Richard's vanity. He hated Sylvia's pretension, but he loved me. Arthur was the one who bought me my first wrench set. He was the one who stood over me in the garage, his voice raspy from years of smoking, teaching me how to listen to an engine. "You hear that, Elias?" he'd say. "That ticking? That's not just noise. That's the machine telling you it's hurting. You have to listen to things that can't speak." He taught me that the measure of a man isn't the title before his name, but the integrity of his word. When Arthur died 4 years ago, the family performed a grotesque pantomime of grief. It was theater. They wore the darkest veils. They rented the most expensive limousines. They sobbed loudly in the front pew. But even as the dirt was being shoveled onto his casket, I heard Richard whispering to Sylvia about knocking down the wall between the library and the solarium. They were already spending his money. They were already renovating his legacy. But the deed never transferred to Richard. 3 weeks before he died, Arthur called me to his bedside. The cancer had whittled him down to bone and shadow, but his eyes were bright, burning with a final, mischievous intelligence. He grabbed my wrist with a grip that was shockingly strong. "Elias," he wheezed, "they are vultures. You know this. If I leave the house to you openly, they will pick your bones clean. They will sue you. They will guilt you. They will make your life a living hell until you sign it over just to get some peace. Do not let them do that." He made me promise. "I am leaving the estate to a blind trust. You are the sole beneficiary. You are the trustee. But you must promise me. Keep it a secret. Let them live there. Let them think they own it. Watch them. Give them enough rope. And when they show you exactly who they are, when there is no doubt left in your heart, when they have proven they are beyond redemption, then you pull the rug." I promised him. So I bought the house and the estate for $1. The paperwork is buried in a safety deposit box across town. For 4 years, I was a silent landlord. I paid the property taxes, which were astronomical. I paid the homeowner's insurance. When the slate roof sprang a leak last year, and Sylvia demanded it be fixed immediately because the drip was ruining her meditation, I paid $40,000 for a new roof. I paid for the boiler repair when the heat went out in the middle of January, listening to Richard scream at the repairman, who I was paying, about incompetence. I worked double shifts at the garage. I ate instant ramen. I drove a truck held together by duct tape and prayer. I funneled every spare dime into maintaining a mansion for a family that wouldn't even invite me to sit at the dinner table. I wanted to see who they were when they thought I had nothing to offer them. I wanted to see the truth. And let me tell you, the truth was ugly. They were monsters. The breaking point didn't happen on a holiday. It happened on my birthday. My 30th birthday. A milestone, right? The kind of day where you take stock of your life. I wasn't expecting a party. I wasn't expecting a car or a check. But Sylvia had insisted, with that fluttery, performative tone of hers, that we have a family gathering. I thought maybe, just maybe after 30 years, this was an olive branch. Maybe the milestone mattered to them. I showered, scrubbed the grease from my hands until my skin was raw, and put on my one good button-down shirt. I walked into the main dining room at 7 p.m. sharp. The room was breathtaking. The crystal chandelier, which I had paid to have rewired 3 months ago because Richard said the flickering was embarrassing, cast a golden glow over the table. The table was set with the good china, the silver that had belonged to my grandmother. There were heavy floral arrangements that smelled of lilies and money. But as I stepped further into the room, I stopped. It wasn't just a family. There were 12 other people there. Richard's business partners. Sylvia's friends from the garden club. A couple of Julian's producer friends. It wasn't a birthday dinner for me. It was a dinner party for them, and my birthday was just a convenient excuse to host it. "Ah, there he is." Richard boomed from the head of the table. He didn't stand up. "Everyone, this is Elias, the birthday boy." He said it with a tone usually reserved for introducing a slow child or a well-trained dog. I sat at the far end of the table, near the swinging door to the kitchen. It was the seat usually reserved for children or late arrivals. Nobody wished me a happy birthday. The conversation flowed around me like water around a stone. They talked about the market, about their summer homes in the Hamptons, about how difficult it is to find good help these days. I ate my soup in silence. I watched them. I watched Sylvia laugh at jokes that weren't funny. I watched Julian charm a young woman with stories of a music career that didn't exist. I watched Mara critique the wine, complaining that it hadn't breathed enough. Then, halfway through the main course, a filet mignon that I knew cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Richard stood up. He tapped his spoon against his crystal wine glass. Cling, cling, cling. The room went silent. All eyes turned to him. He loved this. He lived for the attention. "I'd like to make a toast," Richard said, his face flushed with the expensive Pinot Noir he'd been guzzling. "To family, and to the heavy burden of legacy." He paused for dramatic effect, letting his gaze sweep the room before landing heavily on me. "You know," He continued, putting on that fake, jovial voice he uses when he's about to be cruel, masking the venom in a joke. We try our best as parents. We really do. We give them the best schools, the best tutors, the best opportunities. We pave the road with gold. And sometimes, sometimes you get a racehorse. He gestured vaguely toward Julian and Mara. And sometimes you get a donkey. The silence in the room shattered. The whole table erupted in laughter. It wasn't polite, nervous laughter. It was genuine, raucous amusement. My mother, Sylvia, covered her mouth with a napkin, giggling. "Oh, Richard, don't be terrible," she said, but her eyes were dancing. She was enjoying it. She was proud of his wit. Richard wasn't done. He was on a roll now. "No, truly, it's my cross to bear. Here we are, in this beautiful home, Blackwood Manor, a house that's in the family for generations, line number one. And I have a son who smells like a gas station and lives in the attic like a gargoyle. Elias, stand up." I froze. My fork hovered halfway in my mouth. "Stand up, boy," he commanded, his voice hardening. "Let them see the man of the hour." I stood up. My chair scraped loudly against the parquet floor. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold, so absolute, it felt like liquid nitrogen pumping through my veins. "Look at him." Richard gestured with his glass, spilling a little wine on the tablecloth. 30 years old. No wife. No career. No prospects. Just grease and disappointment. But we keep him around. We give him a roof. Because that's what charity is, right, friends? To charity, Julian shouted, raising his glass. To charity, the table echoed. Mara chimed in from across the table, her voice shrill. Maybe for his birthday we can buy him some soap. Or a personality. That was it. That was the moment the world shifted on its axis. I looked at their faces. I looked at the twisted amusement on Richard's lips, the smug superiority in Sylvia's eyes, the careless cruelty of my siblings. They didn't just think I was a failure. They enjoyed it. My failure was the backdrop against which they projected their own success. They needed me to be small so they could feel big. I looked at the chandelier again. I thought about the invoice for the wiring. $1,200. I thought about the roof. $40,000. I thought about the taxes. $22,000 a year. I didn't yell. I didn't flip the table. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me lose control. I picked up my linen napkin, folded it neatly into a square, and placed it on the table next to my uneaten steak. "Thank you for the dinner," I said. My voice was quiet, steady. "Oh, sit down. Don't be so dramatic," Sylvia snapped, her smile faltering just a fraction. "You have no sense of humor. That's your problem, Elias. You take everything so seriously. Happy birthday to me," I whispered. I turned and walked out of the dining room. I walked through the kitchen, out the back door, and into the cool night air. I walked across the gravel driveway, the stones crunching under my boots, and up the narrow stairs of my apartment above the garage. I didn't go to sleep. I sat at my small, scarred desk. I opened my safe. I pulled out the red folder, the deed, the trust documents, the tax receipts, the ledger of every cent I had spent on them for 4 years, the proof of my ownership and their parasitism. I looked at the clock. It was 9:30 p.m. on a Saturday. I picked up my phone and called Mr. Henderson, my lawyer. He answered on the second ring. "Elias, is everything all right?" "No, Mr. Henderson," I said. "Everything is finally clear." "What do you want to do?" he asked. He knew. He had been waiting for this call for 4 years. I took a deep breath. "Do it," I said. "Execute the eviction. All of them. The main house, the east wing, the carriage house. I want them out." "Are you sure?" "I have never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "Burn it down." The timeline of destruction started on a Tuesday. Mr. Henderson is a shark in a 3-piece suit. He's the kind of lawyer who doesn't yell. He just files paperwork, so precise it cuts like a scalpel. He didn't mail the notices. He hired a process server, a man the size of a commercial refrigerator with a face like a clenched fist, to hand-deliver them. It was a beautiful morning. The sun was shining on the manicured lawns of Blackwood Manor. Richard and Sylvia were having breakfast on the veranda, probably enjoying mimosas. Julian was likely sleeping off a hangover in the East Wing. Mara was probably staging photos for her Instagram in the Rose Garden. The server walked right past the no trespassing sign, which is funny, considering I put there, and marched up the steps. I wasn't there to see it, but Mr. Henderson gave me the play-by-play later. The server handed Richard a thick, yellow envelope. Richard Blackwood? Yes. You've been served. Then he handed one to Sylvia. He walked across the lawn to the carriage house and handed one to Mara. He went to the East Wing, pounded on the door until a bleary-eyed Julian answered and slapped the envelope into his chest. Notice to vacate. 30 days. No lease. Owner, the Arthur Blackwood Trust. I was at work when the chaos began. My phone started vibrating in my pocket at 11:02 a.m. Richard. F03 a.m. Richard. F:05 a.m. Sylvia. F:15 a.m. Mara. F:20 a.m. Julian. 11:25 a.m. Richard again. I didn't answer. I put on my noise-canceling headphones, turned up the classic rock, and focused on rebuilding the carburetor of a 1967 Mustang. The mechanical precision was soothing. The metal did what it was told. It didn't lie. It didn't mock you. By the time I clocked out at 6 p.m., I had 47 missed calls and a string of voicemails that ranged from confused to apocalyptic. When I drove back to the property that evening, I didn't park in the driveway. I parked on the street. I walked up the long drive, my boots heavy on the pavement. Richard was waiting for me at the bottom of the garage stairs. I have never seen a human being that shade of violet. He looked like he was about to stroke out. His veins were bulging in his neck. What the hell is this? He screamed, waving the yellow papers in my face like a weapon. Is this some kind of sick joke? Did you put someone up to this? Who is this trust? I stopped on the second step, looking down at him. The height difference gave me an advantage I had never felt before. Hello, Richard, I said calmly. Don't you hello me. Who is the Arthur Blackwood Trust? This is my house. I am the heir. I am Arthur's brother. Actually, I said, keeping my voice level, almost bored. You're not the heir. Uncle Arthur left the house to the trust, and the trust is managed by the sole beneficiary. Who is the beneficiary? He screamed, spit flying from his mouth, landing on my boots. I leaned in close. Check the second page, Richard. Paragraph 4. Read the fine print. He fumbled with the papers, his hands shaking so hard he almost dropped them. He tore at the pages. His eyes scanned the legal jargon. He stopped. He blinked. He read it again. Elias Blackwood, he whispered. The air left his lungs. He looked up at me. The arrogance was gone for a split second, replaced by a pure, unadulterated confusion that was almost childlike. You own this house. For 4 years, I said. I own the roof you sleep under. I own the floor you're standing on. I own the veranda where you drink your morning mimosas. And I own the dining table where you sat and call me a donkey. This is fraud. Sylvia came running out of the main house, her silk robe flapping behind her like the wings of a bat. You stole this. You manipulated a dying man. You took advantage of your poor uncle. I didn't manipulate anyone, I said, looking her dead in the eye. Arthur knew exactly who you were. He knew you were vultures. And he knew that if I told you the truth, you would destroy me. So I waited, I watched, and now I know. You know what? She hissed. I know that you don't love me, I said. And I know that you don't deserve this house. You have 30 days. Well, actually, 29 days now. I suggest you start packing. I walked up the stairs, unlocked my door, and closed it. I turned the deadbolt. The click echoed like a gunshot. The next month was a study in human desperation. It was like watching a nature documentary about animals trapped in a corner. Week 1 was the attack phase. They went on the offensive. Richard hired a lawyer, a buddy from his country club named Sterling. Sterling called Mr. Henderson, full of bluster and threats about undue influence, and elder abuse. Mr. Henderson didn't blink. He sent over the documentation via courier. He sent the last will and testament, signed and notarized. He sent the video deposition Arthur had recorded, a 20-minute video where Arthur sat in his hospital bed, looked into the camera, and detailed exactly why he was disinheriting Richard. My brother is a pompous fool who would bankrupt his estate in a year, and leaving it to me, Elias is the only honest hands in the family. He sent the receipts. For years of tax payments. For years of insurance premiums. For years of repair bills. All paid from my personal account. Richard's lawyer dropped them 3 days later. I heard he told Richard, "You don't have a case, Richard. You don't even have a leg to stand on. And frankly, you can't afford my retainer anymore." That was the other shoe dropping. They were broke. I knew this, of course. I picked up the mail. I saw the overdue notices for the credit cards. I saw the bank statements. Richard had leveraged his credit to the hilt to maintain the appearance of wealth. Sylvia had maxed out every card she had to keep up with the Joneses. Without the free housing, without the asset of the manor to prop them up, they were insolvent. Week 2 was the gaslighting phase. This was harder to watch because it was so transparently pathetic. Suddenly, they weren't angry. They were worried. They were concerned. Sylvia knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening. She was holding a plate of cookies, store-bought, but arranged on a fancy crystal platter. "Elias, darling," she cooed to the screen door. "Can I come in? We need to talk. We're family." I didn't open the door. "We can talk through the screen, Sylvia." "Oh, stop the silliness," she said, her smile twitching. "We were just teasing at your birthday. You know how your father gets when he drinks. It's just his way of showing affection. It's tough love." "Affection?" I asked. "Calling me a failure in front of strangers is affection? Telling your friends you wished you'd stopped at 2 children. I heard that, by the way, is affection?" "You're being too sensitive," she said, her voice tightening, the mask slipping. "We love you. We allowed you to live here, didn't we? We gave you a home." "Allowed me?" I laughed. It was a harsh, scraping sound. "I allowed you to live here, Mother. I paid the taxes so you could pretend to be rich. I fixed the heat so you wouldn't freeze in your silk sheets. And you treated me like garbage. You treated me like the help." She dropped the act. Her face went cold, her eyes narrowing into slits. "You are an ungrateful, spiteful little brat. If you go through with this, you are dead to us. Do you hear me? Dead." "I was dead to you 4 years ago," I said. "I'm just making it official. Take the cookies, Sylvia. You might need them." Week 3 was a bargaining phase. Mara cornered me in the driveway as I was leaving for work. She had her phone out, holding it discreetly at her side, probably recording for some future lawsuit or social media sob story. "You can't do this to us, Elias," she said, putting on her best influencer pout. "Think about the optics. It looks terrible. Evicting your own parents? Your sister? I have a brand to protect. People will think we're unstable." "You don't have a brand, Mara," I told her. "You have an Instagram account with bought followers and a husband who plays golf on Tuesdays while you live in a carriage house you don't pay for. And maybe if Greg got a job instead of playing fantasy football, you could afford an apartment." "Greg is consulting," she shrieked. "Greg is unemployed." I corrected. "And in 7 days he'll be homeless." Julian tried a different approach. He waited for me by my truck one night, smelling of stale beer and desperation. "Bro, come on," he said. "Offer me a can of cheap lager." I declined. "Look, the parents are crazy, I get it. Dad's a narcissist, Mom's a nightmare. But me? We're cool, right? Can't I just stay in the East Wing? I'll keep it quiet. I won't bother you. I'll even, I don't know, mow the lawn." "You haven't mowed a lawn in your life, Julian," I said. And at the dinner, when Richard called me a charity case, you raised a glass. You laughed. You shouted at charity. It was a joke, man. I was just going along with it to keep the peace. "You didn't keep the peace," I said, opening my truck door. "You picked a side, and you picked the losing one. Get out." The final week was silence. But it wasn't the heavy silence of before. It was a frantic, chaotic silence. Boxes appeared on the porch. Moving trucks, not the expensive full-service movers, but the you-rent-it trucks driven by guys in tank tops, showed up. I watched from my window as my family dismantled their lives. It was pathetic, really, without the backdrop of the mansion. Their furniture looked tacky. Their clothes looked like costumes. Stripped of the setting, they weren't aristocrats being exiled. They were grifters being caught. The day of the deadline, January 28th, arrived. The sky was gray and overcast, threatening snow. I didn't do it alone. I asked the sheriff's department to be there. I wasn't taking chances with Richard's temper or Sylvia's potential for arson. At 10 a.m., Deputy Miller knocked on the main heavy oak door. I stood behind him, flanked by Mr. Henderson. Richard opened the door. He looked 10 years older than he had a month ago. He was unshaven, wearing a wrinkled polo shirt. His eyes were red-rimmed. "We're leaving," he spat at the deputy. "You don't need to harass us. We are going." "Just here to ensure a peaceful transfer of possession, sir," Miller said, his hand resting near his belt. I walked into the house. My house. It echoed. It felt cavernous. They had taken everything they could unscrew. The curtains were gone, leaving the windows bare and staring. The light fixtures in the hallway were missing. Richard had actually uninstalled the antique brass sconces, leaving wires dangling from the holes in the plaster. "That's theft," Mr. Henderson whispered to me, clicking his pen and jotting it down on his notepad. "Fixtures are part of the property. We'll deduct it from the sale of their remaining assets if we have to sue. Let them have the sconces," I said, looking at the damage. "I'm getting the place anyway. I don't want their ghosts in my walls." We walked through the rooms. The dining room, the scene of the crime, so to speak, was empty. Just a rectangular outline of the rug remained on the hardwood floor, a ghost of the table where they had laughed at me. In the driveway, the family was gathered around two sedans and the rented box truck. Sylvia was weeping, not silent, dignified tears, but loud, heaving sobs meant to attract the neighbors. She was clutching a jewelry box like it was the Holy Grail. "Where are we supposed to go?" she wailed at me as I stepped onto the porch. "A motel? Is that what you want for your mother?" "A motel in the bad part of town." "You have a pension, Sylvia," I said, my voice carrying across the lawn. "And Richard has his Social Security. If you sell the Mercedes, you can rent a nice condo in the city. You'll be fine. You just won't be grand. You'll have to be like everyone else." Richard slammed the trunk of his car. He walked up to the edge of the porch steps. He looked up at me. "You think you've won," he said. His voice was shaking, vibrating with a hatred so pure it was almost impressive. "But you'll always be alone. You have no family. You have no legacy. You are nothing. You are a donkey in a palace." I looked at this man who had belittled me my entire life, who had valued status over his own son's dignity, who had treated his brother's generosity as an entitlement. "Richard," I said calmly, "I have the one thing you never had." "And what is that?" he sneered. "I have self-respect," I said. "And I have the deed. Now get off my property." They left. It was a slow, agonizing procession of cars down the long driveway. I watched until the last taillight disappeared around the bend, swallowed by the gray afternoon. I stood on the porch of Blackwood Manor. The silence returned. But this time it wasn't heavy. It didn't feel like judgment. It didn't feel like waiting. It felt like a deep breath. It felt like oxygen. I didn't move into the main house. I hated that house. It smelled like old perfume and lies. I called a real estate agent the next morning. "Sell it," I said. "As is. I don't want to see it again." The market was hot. A developer bought it 2 weeks later for $3.2 million. They planned to turn it into a boutique hotel and spa. I didn't care what they did with it. They could burn it down for all I cared. I took the money. I paid off the small mortgage I had on my own auto shop. I expanded the business, hired 2 guys to help me. I bought a nice, sensible house on a lake about 3 hours away. A house with big windows, a sturdy deck, and absolutely no guest rooms. The fallout was messy, of course. I heard through the grapevine my cousin Angela, the only neutral party left, that Richard and Sylvia divorced 6 months later. Turns out, their marriage couldn't survive without a mansion to house it. Richard lives in a bachelor apartment downtown, drinking too much and telling anyone who will listen about how his ungrateful son stole his birthright. He's become a bore at the local dive bar. Sylvia moved in with her sister in Florida, where she complains about the humidity and tells people she's a displaced heiress who was swindled by a corrupt legal system. Mara and Greg split up. Greg finally got a job selling insurance. Mara is trying to become a lifestyle coach on TikTok, but it's hard to coach people on lifestyle when you're filming from a basement studio apartment with bad lighting. Julian actually reached out a year later. He sent me a letter. No email, a real letter on paper. He apologized. He said losing the house was the wake-up call he needed. He got sober, cut his hair, and got a job teaching music at a community center. He's the only one I might call back. Eventually. Maybe in another year. But for now, I'm enjoying the quiet. I spent my 31st birthday alone. I grilled a thick ribeye steak, opened a cold beer, and sat on my deck looking out at the lake. The sun was setting, painting the water in shades of gold and fire. There were no toasts. There were no speeches. There was just the sound of the water lapping against the shore and the wind moving through the pines. It was the best birthday of my life. Some people think revenge is loud. They think it's screaming and fighting and making a scene. They think it's flipping the table. But I learned from Uncle Arthur, the best revenge is patient. It's quiet. It's letting people walk into the trap they set for themselves, watching them tighten the noose with their own arrogance, and then simply locking the door behind them. I'm not a ghost anymore. I'm just Elias. And for the first time in my life, I'm free.